in conflict. It's to get a political process back up and running. No matter how hard that is, it's certainly not going to be easy. But a two-state solution, that is security for Israel and prosperity and dignity and security for Palestinians as well. That has got to be what we fight for, and it cannot be, no matter how hard we pull away from.
Okay. We had a lot of questions on this, and there's a lot of hands up, so I'm going to come around to quite a few of you now. Yes, the woman there.
I just think the really passive language being used by the government is quite disgusting. This isn't a humanitarian crisis. This isn't something passive. This is a brutal bombardment of a civilian population that is half children. And I think it's time that someone start to find a backbone and start saying that this isn't okay. Everybody's condemning the attacks that Hamas conducted. No one in their right mind would say that that was okay. But when do we start condemning the murder of children from the sky? When do we start condemning bombing mosques and churches and apartment buildings? When do we start condemning that?
Who can you make a ceasefire with? This is a terrorist organisation which has executed babies, which has uploaded murders to Facebook. Hamas is an organisation that needs to be taken out of the Palestinian area. There is absolutely zero ability to negotiate with Israel. They're putting.
How many Palestinian wives have to be
Let him
killed?
speak, and then I'll let you speak.
They are putting rockets next to civilian populations. They are using the Palestinian people as humanitarian shields. There is absolutely no way we can negotiate them. If you want to free Palestine, if you want a peaceful Middle East, Hamas need to be removed.
It's not Hamas being killed. It's not Hamas we're seeing blown to bits on social media, is it? We're seeing children, women, old people, even, the men as well, poor fathers with their children in bags.
Exactly, Jewish people.
Hamas are embedding themselves.
What's the exchange rate for an Israeli life to a Palestinian life? What does the death toll have to get to before this ledger becomes equal? What is it?
Okay.
Because it's thousands.
Let me come round some more of the audience, please. The man back there with the white shirt, further back in the glasses, yeah.
I absolutely agree that it's horrific that there are so many casualties on both sides. I have to say that I completely disagree. It did start on October the 7th. Whatever happened before is completely separate. This is a war that was started deliberately by Hamas on October the 7th. And I'd just like to ask one question. What do we really think Hamas expected? They knew exactly what they were doing, and they have made the Palestinians the victims just as much as the Israelis. And the last thing I'd like to say is, Palestinians aren't the Israelis' enemies. There's this fixation that there'll never be peace. There will be peace, but you give me, as an Israeli, as a Brit, you give me somebody who I can talk to who's not going to tell me on the flip side, actually, I want to exterminate you and I want to kill all your family.
Let's hear from the man in the glasses there. Yes.
I think there is a peaceful side to 2 points. You've got the West Bank, where you've got Mahmoud Abbas, who's prepared to talk dialogue, but it's not going nowhere. And then you've got those that are in Gaza, open-air prison. We hear a lot of rhetoric from the United Nations, and the United Nations is, as far as I'm concerned, puppets.
Puppets of who?
Puppets of the 1%. The 1%, the elite, whoever they may be. However, the United Nations, the General Secretary made a statement and the backlash he faced. And so, it's difficult to be in a position and be opinionated, especially in the United Nations, who are meant to be seen to be quite equal to everybody. The other point is the conflict did start a long time ago, and I think the perpetrators should be held to account. Britain and France have the biggest accountability to account for in terms of the beginning of this conflict. They were the ones that signed over the agreement to say that Jews were allowed to have a piece of Palestine. Historically, we need to look at it with a clear narrative rather than looking at it from the 7th of October.
Gabriel.
Look, I would challenge your suggestion that the UN is in any way representative of Israel's interests. Let it not be forgotten that a minister of the Israeli state today called on his general secretary to resign in light of what Israel claimed were comments contextualising what happened. You talked about Jews being given a piece of land. I mean, there are clearly people in the audience tonight who object to the circumstances in which Israel came to exist in 1948. We have to deal with the reality as it exists right now, and that reality is that Israel does exist, and its principal goal as a state is to safeguard the interests and safety of the Jewish people and all of the inhabitants within its borders. So let's just recognise that reality and consider, where do we actually go from here? There are two possible solutions. There's a potential military solution, and there is a diplomatic one. And anybody who talks about a ceasefire has to state in detail what the diplomatic solution looks like. There's been the inevitable condemnation of Israel's response, and candidly, I'll try to be intellectually humble. I have no idea if in the context of asymmetric warfare there is any way of avoiding civilian casualties, although the numbers are horrific and disgusting and heartbreaking. So if you want to avoid more of that, you have to have specific, detailed ideas. And I will say, I find it extraordinary, and it's easy to forget, Turkey is a member of NATO. Qatar owns half the real estate in London. They have for 2 decades hosted large proportions of Hamas's leadership. We have to use not only the West, but our allies in the Middle East and their diplomatic resource to ensure Hamas. The only way this ends is if Israel can look its population in the eye and say, after this status quo shattering event, the biggest murder of Jews since the Holocaust, they have to, Bibi Netanyahu, whatever one happens to think of the man, and I do not think either side are well served by their leaders, he has to be able to look his public in the eye and say, I've extracted security guarantees. The only way that happens is if Hamas's leadership either leaves or there are massive diplomatically negotiated changes to the reality on the ground, which has been there since 2005.
Saida, you want to come back?
Yeah. I agree with a lot of what Gabriel has said, because I think at the moment what we don't have in Israel and Palestine between Hamas and Netanyahu is that either party is a partner for peace. I want to read something to you. This quote: anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support the bolstering of Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. That was Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2019, supporting Hamas, because he knows that as long as Hamas remains there, he can always argue that there is no partner for peace. During our lifetime, there have been 2 moments when peace could have happened. One was in the early 90s with the Oslo Accords, which were negotiated by Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, and both of them were awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Tragically, 2 years after those accords, a right-wing Israeli settler assassinated Yitzhak Rabin, and after the end of that, the peace process came to an end. The second moment came not so long ago in 2016 when John Kerry, as Secretary of State, put forward a peace proposal. That proposal was accepted by the Palestinian Authority and it was rejected by one Netanyahu. So I think it's really important. I do believe, Gabriel, that there is an opportunity for peace. It's the only way that Israel will secure its long-term future. And I genuinely believe that what we should be saying to our politicians is that you've got to stop using language which actually in the real world makes no sense. It sounds like
Are you including your Conservative?
I'm including the Conservatives and actually the leader of the opposition. In the real world, it sounds insensitive. It sounds like it's one-sided. It sounds hypocritical, and it sounds like you do not understand the depth of this issue, and it goes nowhere towards actually resolving the issue. All you do is embolden Netanyahu, a man who is mired in allegations of corruption, who actually in his cabinet has a minister who has been convicted of terrorism, another minister who is a self-confessed fascist, and who are governing on the basis of a coalition agreement which denies the very right of the Palestinian state to exist.
Well, firstly, I'd say I very strongly agree with Saida in everything she's said tonight. I think anyone who thinks that history started a week past Saturday is part of the problem with this discussion. We must look at this in the right. I deplore anti-Semitism, I deplore Islamophobia, I deplore any death of any innocent civilian anywhere, And the SNP, you'll be aware, we take this quite personally because our First Minister, our leader, Hamza Yousaf, has got close relatives, close loved ones in Gaza right now. I grew up in the Middle East. We've got all sorts of connections to the wider region. And in the Middle East, everything is connected to everything else. And I really agree with Gabriel's point that the leadership of the Palestinian sides and the Israeli sides are not well served by their leaders right now. And it's not just two sides.
But in terms of Brandon's question, is it possible for Israel to defend itself and also root out Hamas while avoiding conflict and humanitarian catastrophe? What's the answer to that question?
Well, first off, there has to be a ceasefire in order to allow humanitarian aid in and talks to happen.
And do you think Hamas would go along with that ceasefire?
I think Hamas is now in a position where they're going to have to go along with that. There's already rumours just in the past 24 hours that Hamas themselves are proposing their evacuation to Lebanon or perhaps another third country.
You think they should?
I think they should get out of the equation, absolutely, and that's where there would be agreement on this panel. Hamas is part of the problem. I carry no torch for anybody in this discussion. Because I'm a gay man. I would far rather live in Tel Aviv than Ramallah. Hamas throws people like me off high buildings. I carry no torch for anybody in this. And none of us should be partisan within this. So war has rules. International humanitarian law has to be the basis of any negotiated settlement. Every single conflict in human history has ended with a piece of paper and a treaty. There has to be negotiation, however tough, however hard. There has to be peace, and the way that you can actually get to a peace is by talks. So there has to be a ceasefire, there has to be a talks-based settlement based on international law, and we need to see that actually taking forward right now because too many people are hurting on all sides.
And here in the black shirt.